The internet is full of scary stories, but what you don't know is that sometimes they really end in tragedy, and the case you will see in this video is proof of that. But first, if you're new here, remember to subscribe to the channel. The channel's goal is to get 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I think we can achieve it. So please sign up. Now let's move on to the first story. This thing made me a killer. My name is Hunter Bell, and as of this writing, I have 1 week to live. 5 years ago, I was convicted of 13 counts of murder, first degree, and sentenced to death. The prosecutor's office, the police, and the media portrayed me as one of the murderers most evil of recent times, holding me directly responsible for a bloody and sadistic massacre. But I am not guilty of these heinous crimes. I want to make this clear before proceeding. My account of the events of that horrible day was dismissed by the judge as a desperate attempt to escape with an insanity plea. That's not true, but I was found mentally competent and convicted on all charges. All my appeals have been exhausted and my execution date is set for next week. I may receive a last-minute reprieve from the governor, but I highly doubt that will happen. As far as the public is concerned, I'm evil incarnate. But they have no idea. I saw true evil and looked it straight in the eyes, and so with my death seeming imminent, I decided to set the record straight. I won't say I was a saint. I had my troubles with the law during a wasted youth and spent time in reform school. But I had been on the right path for years and would never have planned and executed a robbery if it weren't for Max. This is my younger brother. Max has always been a troubled boy. I guess you could describe him as emotional, immature, and impulsive. He always got into trouble when we were young, fighting with children older and doing all kinds of crazy things. As his older brother, I felt responsible for Max and was constantly helping him. This pattern continued into our adult lives. Max developed a problem with drugs in his late teens, and it led him down a dangerous path. He ended up owing $30,000 to a particularly violent drug gang who demanded full payment. To demonstrate that they were serious, the gangsters cut Max's little finger, and his boss said that would kill Max if he didn't get the money within a week. There was no way my brother could get the money on his own, so once again I stepped in to help. The bank robbery that it wasn't a professional job, not by a long shot. We certainly weren't Ocean's 11, and at best, our plan was a burglary and robbery job. But I was desperate to save my brother's life and willing to cross the line into criminality to do so. It was never our intention to hurt anyone. If everything had gone as planned, no one would have. I think we were naive going in, although I never could have predicted the horrors we would witness inside that damned bank. The team I assembled was made up of 4 people. That included Max and me, of course. I thought about keeping my brother out of this, but this was his mess, and it seemed only fair that he play a role in resolving it. Plus, I believed I could control Max as long as I kept an eye on him. The third man to enter the bank was Dante. He was definitely the loose cannon of our group, a violent criminal with a long history of reckless behavior. Still, Dante was the closest thing we had to a professional gangster, as he had served 5 years for his involvement in a previous robbery and had ties to the criminal underworld. And he was able to provide us weapons untraceable and a clean car. Our getaway driver was another potential problem. Dante had an associate who agreed to do the work, but he was arrested the day before the robbery, and so we needed to find a last-minute replacement. That's where Arnold came in. Arnold was an old friend from high school who I knew I could trust, but he wasn't a criminal. I explained our situation to Arnold, and he reluctantly agreed to help on the condition that he not carry a weapon or enter the bank. His only job was to get us to a safe place after the robbery was over. As for the bank itself, we chose an old establishment located in a quiet suburb outside the city. There was nothing particularly special or notable about the bank in question, no dark history that I knew of. We only chose this establishment because it was an easy target. The nearest police station was a 10-minute drive away, so even if the silent alarm was shot, we should be able to escape before the police arrive. We had a plan of some kind. While Max and I held the cashiers and customers at gunpoint, Dante would force the manager to give us access to the safe. He figured we could get somewhere between 50 and 100 grand out of the job, enough to pay off Max's debt and still provide a healthy profit, although most of that would be Dante's share. On paper it looked easy, but of course there were 1,000 things that could go wrong, and our plan was amateurish at best. I knew the robbery was a high-risk endeavor, and I seriously considered calling it off the morning of the robbery, but I couldn't think of any other way to get my brother out of this mess, so we went ahead. This is a decision I will regret until the moment they put the needle in my vein, because nothing the gangsters could have done to Max would have been worse than the horrors that followed. The atmosphere inside the car was understandably tense as we drove to work. We barely spoke a word when Arnold pulled up to the curb and the three of us donned our masks and gloves and prepared our weapons. I was armed with a 9mm pistol. Max had a Magnum revolver and Dante carried a 12-gauge pump-action gun. All of our weapons were loaded, but if things went according to plan, no shots would be fired. I looked at our driver Arnold as we exited the vehicle, seeing the fear in his eyes as he gripped the steering wheel tightly and sweated profusely. My friend wasn't out for this, I knew that. I placed a firm hand on Arnold's shoulder, forcing him to look me in the eyes as I tried to project confidence in my voice. "Don't worry, friend, we'll be done before you know it." He broke eye contact and nodded while still holding tight to the steering wheel. We both had walkie-talkies to communicate in case there were any changes to the plan, but again, I hoped that wouldn't be necessary. Arnold's behavior didn't exactly fill me with confidence, but I brushed that aside as the three of us exited the vehicle and headed to the sidewalk. I admit to feeling tremendous apprehension as we approached the bank's reinforced glass doors, which were darkened so we couldn't see inside. It was perfectly natural for me to feel apprehensive at that moment. I was about to cross the Rubicon and descend into the world of crime, but it was more than that. I felt a cold shiver running through my entire body as if a sixth sense had been activated within me. Something deep in my gut was screaming, telling me not to go in, but it was already too late. Dante ran through the door first, and Max soon followed. The work was done, and I had to do my part. I only had limited time to assess my surroundings when we entered, but I immediately realized something wasn't right. Tedious music played from speakers attached to the high ceilings. I found this continuous buzzing slightly annoying, but thought little about it at the time. Meanwhile, the bank's interior was impressive, at least on the surface. The floor beneath our feet was adorned with marble tiles, and large Roman-style pillars stood on either side of us. However, upon closer inspection, one could see that the establishment had seen better days. I noticed the row of cash registers in front of us, but was surprised by the almost complete absence of people. There were no customers that I could see, and only one staff member. We've all seen the middle-aged single woman with blonde hair tied into a bun and her face covered in lots of makeup. She was behind the counter in the metal safety cage and certainly saw us coming in. One would expect a bank teller to react with horror at the sight of three masked men and running towards her counter, but this lady didn't blink or move an inch. As we approached, I saw the disconcertingly wide smile etched on his lips and a dark look in his brown eyes, one of barely concealed mischief and malice. We point our weapons at her face, but she still didn't flinch and her smile didn't falter as she spoke. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," she said calmly. "What can I do for you today?" The three of us looked at each other in confusion, our eyes meeting beneath our balaclavas. Eventually, it was Dante who responded, growling through clenched teeth as he did so. "What, are you stupid or something? This is a robbery." The eyebrows rose as she responded surprisingly. "Oh, how exciting," she said. "Now, gentlemen, this is my first robbery, so you'll have to tell me how it all works." I saw Dante's eyes narrow in furious frustration as his finger was positioned on the trigger. I feared my hot-headed companion was about to blow his head off, so I quickly intervened to prevent it, placing a firm hand on Dante's gun before forcing him to lower his grip. Weapon. And then I looked at the cashier, still smiling, reading the plastic badge attached to her light blue blouse that said, Alice. I lowered my own weapon, trying to speak to them calmly in an attempt to calm the tense situation. "Listen, Alice, we don't want to hurt you," I said. "Oh, that's good. Thank you very much for your consideration." She interrupted as her eyes lit up. I paused for a moment, struggling to understand Alice's bizarre behavior. Was she in shock? Did she even understand what was going on here? Alice, I need you to open the cash registers, I instructed. Ah, of course, no problem, sir, she replied, her smile never fading. She slammed her palm against a red button visible on the counter in front of her, and suddenly all 10 cash registers along the counter opened at once. I saw my brother's eyes light up with anticipation as he ran down the line, but his expression soon changed from excitement to disappointment and frustration. "They are all empty," he exclaimed in dismay. "Every one of them." I looked over the counter and discovered that my brother was right. There wasn't a single dollar or cent in any of the open cash registers. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath. For a moment I was paralyzed by confusion, but Dante's patience had run out. I could only watch as our hot-headed comrade raised his gun and aimed it directly at Alice's head before shouting, "Listen, you stupid bitch, you're going to take me to the manager now." "Ah, you want to see the manager?" Alice repeated. "I'm afraid he's very busy at the moment." "You're going to take me to him or I'm going to blow the shit out of you," Dante growled. I knew Dante was serious, and there was nothing more I could do to control him. I saw Alice's eyes narrow and her painted smile fall for the first time. "Well, if you insist, sir," she finally replied. With that, she pressed another button that opened the cage door, allowing access to the area behind the counter. Meanwhile, Alice calmly left her station and walked to the now open door before inviting us inside. "Well, gentlemen, may we proceed?" We all looked at each other once more. No words were spoken, but I think all three of us were disturbed by the way the situation was developing. Until now, we had witnessed the absence of customers, the empty cash registers, and the bizarre behavior of Alice, the only employee on duty. It all seemed to add up to something disturbing, but I couldn't put my finger on what was wrong. I just hoped the manager would cooperate and give us access to the safe. That seemed like the only way we were still going to get anything out of this damned job. We followed Alice past the steel barrier and through a second door that led to the hallways and offices at the back of the bank. Alice, who I assume was now our hostage, led our procession at a leisurely pace, while the three of us followed with our weapons pointed out as we scanned the hallways for other team members. But we didn't find any. This only made me more suspicious, not to mention nervous. I looked at the CCTV cameras fixed to the ceiling and noticed that they all seemed to be off, which I found curious. And to my annoyance, I noticed that the ambient music was also playing in the back, except it seemed even louder and more intrusive. But then suddenly the speakers came to life and a horrible high-pitched noise exploded, temporarily drowning out all other sounds. The horrible noise attacked my eardrums, but thankfully it ended after a few seconds. A moment of silence followed before a new, even more disturbing sound exploded. To our collective horror, we heard a deep, disturbing laugh coming from the speakers, a dirty, sadistic laugh that sent a shiver down my spine. We all stopped in our tracks, except Alice, who continued her slow march down the windowless hallway without concern, her back to us as she walked. The sinister laughter continued for about 5 to 10 seconds, and then we heard his voice for the first time. I'm not sure how to describe the voice coming through the bank's speaker system. All I can say is that it was a deep, almost inhuman scream, full of malice and an almost sadistic joy. 3 flies enter the spider's web. They come voluntarily in search of easy prey. But the spider sees everything, and there is no escape. My jaw dropped, and the pistol shook in my hand. Max turned to me and his eyes were filled with cold terror, but Dante continued to act tough, growling as he tightened his grip on the shotgun. "Someone is trying to screw us. I'm going to teach the son of a bitch a lesson." I thought about it for a moment. Dante wasn't the smartest guy in the world, but maybe he was right. The most likely explanation was that the manager, or someone working at the bank, was trying to scare us. But if this was a ruse, was Alice involved? The bank teller ignored the strange warning, walking to the end of the hallway and opening the door on the left. Then she turned to face us, the crooked smile back on her lips as she addressed us in a typically polite yet bizarre tone. "The manager's office. He's ready to see you now." Max and I looked at each other again, and I think we were thinking the same thing. As brothers, we have gotten ourselves into more than a few bad situations in our time. Sometimes we stand up and fight, other times we run. Max was the more impulsive of the two of us, the kind of child who would jump off the cliff or enter the old abandoned house without thinking. In fact, it was Max's reckless behavior that got us into this mess in the first place. But at that moment, my brother looked genuinely terrified, and he froze on the spot, seemingly unable to move forward. But I was the big brother, and I needed to stay strong for Max, so I slapped him on the back and simply said, "Let's go." Dante was either too dumb or too stubborn to be afraid, however, and so he was the first to enter the manager's office, roughly pushing the still smiling Alice as he passed. Max and I followed behind our comrade, but suddenly Dante recoiled in horror, backing away from the door with a look of shock etched on his face. "What the hell is that?" he cursed in disbelief. I didn't want to look into that room. Whatever Dante had seen, I knew it couldn't be good. But someone had to take charge at that moment, so I stepped up. When I entered the office, I discovered a scene of chaos, with furniture overturned and the computer monitor broken. And in the center of the destroyed office, behind the overturned desk, was a man who I assumed was the bank manager. The gray-haired middle-aged man was a mess. He had been beaten to a pulp, his torn shirt covered in blood, his nose broken, and his left eye swollen shut. He was securely tied to his own chair with a wire that cut his skin, and he was unconscious or possibly dead. It was hard to tell, but clearly someone had done something to him. But who was responsible for this brutal attack? And why did they do this? I stood at the door with my two companions for a long moment, looking at the bank manager and tied. I read the tag on his shirt that said, "Hello, my name is Andrew." It seemed like a bad joke, given the circumstances. I felt a hand on my shoulder, which made me jump, and I turned to see my brother, easily recognizable despite the mask covering his face. "Hunter, what the hell is going on?" he exclaimed. "Don't use my real name," I retorted angrily, although my anger subsided when I saw the regret in my brother's eyes. Looking back at the abused manager, who I now knew was called Andrew, something suddenly clicked in my head. "It's another team," I said firmly. "What?" Dante asked, confused. "Think about it, man," I replied knowingly. "The bench is empty. Some psychopath is calling us on the PA. And now we find this poor guy beaten to hell. Another team got here before us, and we're both robbing the same bank." It was the only explanation that made sense to me at that moment. Max seemed as worried as I was about this revelation, but Dante remained defiant. "These idiots are going to regret ever setting foot on our territory," he spat as he cocked his gun. I wasn't so sure, though. It seemed like this work was going south really fast, and I didn't like all these deviations from the plan. My instincts were strongly telling me to call Arnold on the walkie-talkie and abort the entire operation. I wanted to run the hell out of there, but it was Max who persuaded me against that course of action. "That guy," he muttered as he pointed to the manager strapped to the chair. "He's..." I got closer and saw that the man was breathing. "He's still alive, but passed out," I confirmed with some relief. "We have to help him," Max said suddenly. I looked around, surprised, and soon met my brother's eyes, confirming that he was serious. "That's not us, brother. He is not our responsibility." "You said no one would get hurt." Max reminded me, "We can't close our eyes." I sighed loudly. This was one hell of a moment for my brother to develop a conscience, but deep down I knew he was right. Dante had a different perspective, however. "Of course we need the manager," he proclaimed. "He's the only one who can take us to the vault." I snorted before responding. "What about Alice?" Dante's eyes opened as he looked back and forth and out the door. "Oh shit!" he cursed. I almost freaked out at that moment because I realized that Alice, the bank teller turned hostage, had disappeared, escaping while we were arguing amongst ourselves. "Holy shit, man," I yelled, yelling at Dante. "Find her and bring her back." Dante nodded before running out the door and out into the hallway as he searched for our escaping hostage. I nodded before speaking to Max, saying, "Okay then, let's free this guy." I took my pocket knife and cut the wires binding the manager's wrists and ankles, and then I repeatedly poked the man in the shoulder to wake him up. The manager named Andrew slowly regained consciousness. After a moment, His eyes opened and he screamed, making me step back in shock. "My God!" he shouted. "Please, no more!" I stood there dumbfounded, looking into Andrew's wide, terrified eyes and wondering who the hell had done this to him. In the end, it was Max who ran forward and tried to calm the man down, saying, "Hey, don't worry, buddy, we're not going to hurt you." He held Andrew down as the man flailed in blind panic, but Max's efforts were ultimately successful as the manager adjusted to his new situation and regained some level of composure. But still, he looked at Max and me with understandable suspicion, no doubt noticing our masks and weapons. "You're not cops," he said cautiously. "No, we are not police officers." I confirmed, "We came here to rob you, but I think someone beat us to it." Andrew shook his head vigorously. "You do not understand. You have no idea what you are dealing with. We have to get out of here now." With that, he tried to get up from the chair, only to stumble while holding his bleeding forehead. Max and I ran forward to catch him before he collapsed. "We need help for you," I said with concern. "Do you have a first aid station here?" "Yes, in the kitchen," Andrew confirmed with a meek nod, "but we need to be careful. He's still out there." "Don't worry. We'll take care of this asshole," I said while pointing to the weapon on my waist. But Andrew was right. I had no idea who or what we were up against. Max led the way, his revolver drawn, while Andrew and I stayed behind. Andrew directed us to the staff kitchen with a weak nod, but we didn't go that far. Suddenly, we were all alerted by a sound coming from behind us, a loud and surprisingly jovial whistle accompanied by the crunch of heavy boots on the tiled floor. We all turned around in time to see a man casually walking down the hallway towards us, smiling and whistling as he came. The man was a security guard dressed in an impeccable dark blue uniform. He was of advanced age. His skin was wrinkled and his hair was white, and there was a strange, almost crazed look in his eyes. But what really worried me was the weapon which he carried in his holster. The security guard stopped about 10 meters away from us. His smile widened as he stopped whistling and said, "Hello, everyone. What's going on here?" Slowly, I reached for my pistol, but before I could do anything, Max walked past me and aimed his weapon to the guard's chest. "Stay still, you idiot," my brother ordered. "No, don't shoot him," shouted Andrew as the injured bank manager suddenly regained his voice. "It's just Carl." He further explained, "He's our guard, close to retirement. A good man." I continued to support Andrew as he gathered the strength to shout to his employee, "Do as these men say, Carl. We don't want any problems." Carl's smile turned into a frown as he responded in a disappointed tone. "Face, I've waited my entire career for this. I want to be the hero who stops the bad guys in their tracks." I was worried and perplexed by the old man's response, but when I looked at Andrew, I saw his good eye widen in terror as he whispered fearfully in my ear, "Oh God, it's him! He took the form of Carl!" "What?" I exclaimed in disbelief, but there was no time for an answer. Max cocked his revolver, taking aim as he shouted his final warning. "Play your weapon on the ground and raise your fucking hands," he shouted. I wanted to intervene, but I was speechless. I knew Max was scared, even though he was acting tough. My brother was many things, but he was not one murderer. But Carl, or whoever he really was, wouldn't back down. "Hey man," he exclaimed with almost childish excitement, "how about we settle this with an old-fashioned shootout? I'll even give you the first chance. What do you say, man?" "Don't do that, old man," Max replied, his voice starting to crack. "I'll shoot you." "Okay," Carl responded enthusiastically as his wrinkled hand reached for his gun holster. "Weapon. On the count of 3 then. 1, 2. Bang! Max shot a single shot from his revolver and hit Carl in the center of his torso. The old man fell and grabbed his chest in an overly dramatic way, shouting, "Oh man, you got me!" But when he removed his hands, there was no bullet wound or blood. Maybe he was wearing a Kevlar vest, but something definitely wasn't right. My brother still held his smoking revolver aloft, but his hand was now shaking and he seemed paralyzed with fear. Meanwhile, Carl smiled cruelly as he said, "My turn." With that, he drew his own weapon with incredible speed and aimed at my brother. "No!" I shouted, dropping Andrew like a sack of potatoes as I was to protect Max. But there was no time. I saw Carl squeezing the trigger and braced myself for the worst, but all we heard was an empty click. At this, Carl exploded into hysterics, emitting a cruel, inhuman laugh as his dark eyes lit up. "No way, man," he laughed. "I'm not gonna let you guys get away that easy." And with that, the security guard turned on his heel and ran down the hallway in the opposite direction, disappearing just around the corner. "What the fuck?" I muttered under my breath as my exhausted brain tried to make sense of what I had just witnessed. I looked at Max and saw that my brother was frozen, his weapon still pointed at empty space. Slowly and carefully, I placed my hand on his trembling arm and forced him to lower his head. Weapon. I then went to help Andrew, who was still sprawled out on the floor where I had knocked him down. I was helping the manager up with my left hand when I saw a figure running towards us further down the hall. Taking out my weapon with my right hand, I aimed and prepared to shoot, only stopping when I saw our masked companion wielding a shotgun running towards me. "Wow, calm down, boss," Dante shouted. I lowered my weapon and I addressed him. "What the hell happened to you?" I retorted. "I was looking for the woman," he replied defensively. "I heard the shit and thought you guys needed help." I nodded in acknowledgement. "Did you find Alice?" I asked, suddenly remembering the missing hostage. Dante paused before answering, and I swore the fire behind his eyes was gone, as if something inside him had broken. "Yeah, I found her, and the others. I think you'll want to see this, boss." I didn't like what I was hearing, not one bit. However, when Dante turned and began to slowly walk back down the hall, the three of us followed, and I believe we all feared what we would find. We felt it before we saw it, my nostrils assaulted by the foul stench of death. I saw the trail of blood dry on the tiles, leading us towards the scene of a massacre in large scale. We turned another corner and discovered the much sought-after safe. The security cage at the front was open, although the safe's thick steel door remained firmly closed. But between the cage and the safe was a pile of mutilated corpses, human beings massacred like animals in a horrible scene. I counted 10 bodies in total, some wearing staff uniforms and others dressed in casual clothes or business suits. They all had their hands tied behind their backs with wire, and their throats had been cut from ear to ear, spilling blood all over the tiled floor. Andrew cried out in grief when he saw the bodies and realized that many of the victims were his co-workers. I watched the bank manager examine the faces of the dead as if he was looking for someone, and he seemed relieved when he didn't find them among the pile of corpses. My brother didn't react well to the bloody scene, recoiling in horror as he took off his mask and vomited in the corner. Even Dante remained solemnly silent, and it seemed that the bath of it was too much for him to bear. I fought my instincts as I walked over to the pile of bodies and examined the victims in more detail. I almost jumped out of my skin when I saw one of the women's badges, dead because it said Alice. Looking at her face, I realized she was the same middle-aged blonde woman who met us at reception, except this Alice had her throat. She may have been murdered in the few minutes since we last saw her, but her body was cold and pale and she was bleeding to the... By my calculations, Alice was dead hours ago, but it got even weirder. As I inspected the other bodies, I soon came across Carl, the white-haired security guard who had confronted us in the hallway just 2 minutes earlier. He was the same brutal way as the others and was clearly some time ago. It didn't make any sense, and I didn't know how to explain it, but I had a feeling the bank manager might be able to provide some answers. I turned to Andrew, who was leaning against the wall with his head in his hands. "What the hell happened here?" I asked. "Who did this?" Andrew trembled, not making eye contact as he whispered his answer. "I don't know what he is. Not exactly. I just know he's not human." "What the hell do you mean?" Dante growled. Andrew raised his head, staring at Dante with his good eye. "Call him a demon or a shapeshifter if you want. Have you seen how he can take the form of those he murdered? He is one murderer, relentless with superhuman strength, and your bullets won't stop him." "That's bullshit," Dante responded, although his voice sounded uncertain. As for me, I could hardly believe what I was hearing, but I couldn't think of any other logical explanation for the horrors we witnessed. "What does he want?" I asked firmly, although I admit I was afraid to hear the answer. A coldness washed over Andrew as he lowered his head and his voice dropped to a whisper. There's a sealed lockbox in the safe that's been there for decades, long before I took this job. My predecessor told me to never let anyone get their hands on that box no matter what. I didn't understand why at the time, but now I understand. I don't know what's inside the box or what it means to him, but this monster will do anything to get to it. He paused briefly, nodding toward the pile of corpses. He killed them all to try to get in, but I'm the only one who knows the combination to the safe. The bastard beat the hell out of me. And he could have broken me if you hadn't arrived when you did. I shook my head in disbelief, trying to come to terms with the hell we had accidentally walked into. I was still considering our next move when there was a subsequent development. Our attention was drawn back to the pile of bodies when we heard a sudden high-pitched cough as someone we thought was dead. He suddenly sat up, his eyes filled with terror as he screamed, "We have a live one!" Dante exclaimed. I climbed over the bodies, offering a helping hand to the survivor. He was a young man with a thin build and sporting a well-groomed beard. The boy was covered in blood, but I couldn't see any injuries on his body. His hands were tied, but I soon freed him with my hand. "Make." "Oh shit, oh shit," the boy kept repeating as he slowly recovered from the shock. "Adverts." I helped him up and guided him away from the other bodies. Meanwhile, my brother came to help. "Hey man, are you hurt?" Max asked sympathetically. "I do not think so." The boy whimpered with trembling lips as he looked tiredly at the corpses. "What's your name, friend?" I asked. "Marco," he replied shakily. "My name is Marco." "Are you a customer, Marco?" Andrew asked suspiciously. "Yes," he replied as he looked the bank manager in the eyes. "I just went in to make a deposit, then this psychopath took us all hostage and started people. I pretended to and I hid under the other bodies until he left." I took a deep breath before speaking again, feeling that our group needed leadership at that moment. "We're going to get out of here. All of us," I said firmly. "You're kidding?" Dante exclaimed. "What about the money?" "To hell with money," I replied. "We need to get out before this thing kills us all. Let's go." There was no further discussion, as our motley group quickly returned to the lobby. However, we were stopped halfway by Marco, who suddenly exclaimed, "Hey, did you guys hear that?" I turned and saw Marco putting his ear to a closed door in the hallway. We were all silent, and sure enough, I could hear a soft whisper coming from the other side of the door. "What's in there?" I asked, directing my question to Andrew. "Well, nothing," he replied. "It's just a storage closet." I sighed deeply, not liking the direction this was going. "It could be another survivor," Max stated hopefully. "Yes, or it could be a trap," I thought, but didn't say. But despite my doubts, I slowly went to the closet, my weapon in his right hand as he reached out while using his left to carefully turn the doorknob. I opened the door and aimed my pistol, but I lowered the weapon when I saw the hostage. The young woman inside was bound and gagged on the floor next to the maps and cleaning supplies. She had dark hair, olive skin, and wore the same light blue blouse that marked her as a bank employee. Her green eyes were initially filled with fear, but lit up with a spark of hope when she saw us. To my surprise, Andrew walked past me, apparently forgetting his own injuries as he rushed to untie the young woman. "Isabella, thank God!" the bank manager exclaimed emotionally as he removed his gag. "I feared the worst when I saw the others." Isabella was equally moved and passionately hugged the manager as soon as her hands were free. "Oh, Andrew, what did they do to you?" From the way they acted together, I thought there was more to Andrew and Isabella's relationship than a simple boss-employee dynamic, but that was none of my business. "Let's go, guys," I interrupted. "You can have your meeting later. We need to get out of this damn bank." Everyone agreed on this point, so we continued walking. When our group returned to the bank lobby, I think we all had a dark feeling. The CCTV cameras were not operational, and Andrew explained that the system had been turned off by the intruder shortly before he entered the building. However, I had the unpleasant feeling that someone was watching our progress. It was only when we reached the tinted glass doors that I remembered Arnold, our getaway driver. We had been out of contact for several minutes, and he was no doubt wondering what had happened. Picking up my walkie-talkie, I called my friend. "Arnold, are you listening? Over?" There was a brief crackle of ominous static before he responded. "Hunter, where the hell were you?" came the excited reply. "It's a long story, but we are leaving, and we're bringing some people with us." "People?" Arnold responded through the static. "What do you mean?" "I explain everything. Just get the car ready." With that, I placed my hand on the door handle, only to find that it was locked. A moment later, I tried the other door, only to get the same result. "Holy shit!" I cursed in frustration before bringing the walkie-talkie to my lips. "Arnold, we're locked down. I need you to open the door on your side." "For God's sake." Arnold swore, but a moment later we saw his dark silhouette on the other side of the glass as he tried in vain to force his way in. At this point, Dante lost his temper, and before I could stop him, he cocked his gun and shouted, "That!" And then he stepped forward and opened fire. The sound of the shot was almost deafening as it reverberated through the empty lobby. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I shouted angrily at Dante. He just shrugged. But of course the glass was bulletproof and hadn't broken. Suddenly my walkie-talkie came to life. "What happened?" Arnold asked in panic. "Don't worry." I responded in an attempt to reassure him. "We're going to have to find another way out. Arnold, I need you to be quiet." "No," came the firm response. "Screw Hunter, I didn't sign up for this." I sighed in frustration, trying to maintain a calm tone as I spoke on the radio. "Listen, Arnold, I know this isn't what we planned, but we really need you now." "No, I won't go to prison for you," he replied emphatically. "I'm sorry, Hunter, but you're on your own." With that, Arnold ended the communication and his silhouette disappeared from the door. I rolled my eyes, looking at my disheveled and scared companions. I could see the hope slowly fading from his bloodshot eyes. But they were looking to me for leadership, and I needed to keep their hope alive somehow. "Is there another way?" I asked, directing my question to Andrew. "Yes," he confirmed, "but it's likely he blocked that door too." "Can we ask for help?" Max asked. "No police," Dante responded firmly. "It's not an option." Andrew said, shaking his head. He cut the phone lines before entering. Even cell service was down. The bastard thought of everything. There was a moment of silence before the bank's speakers came to life, and our captor spoke to us with his haunting words. "The flies try to escape, bringing some strays with them, but the spider isn't done with them yet. Still, now is not the time to despair. A deal can be made. All parties can get what they want." With that, the broadcast ended, and we were left in an ominous silence. "He wants to make a deal with us?" Max finally asked. "You can't give him what he wants," Andrew said firmly. "Why not?" Dante interrupted. "He wants to get into the vault, and so do we. What is the problem?" "You can't let him win," Andrew shouted angrily. A heated argument could very well have ensued, except I intervened. "Let's not play this psychopath's game," I said firmly, giving Dante a hard look as I did so. This meant I needed to come up with an alternative plan. I was still thinking when I heard a dirty laugh coming from behind me. We all turned to look at Marco, the mysterious survivor we found among the bodies. But he was no longer Marco. The man had transformed into something demonic, growing into a statue as his eyes lit up with predatory zeal and his teeth turned into fangs. And to make matters worse, the nails on his left hand had turned into claws, each 6 inches long and as sharp as daggers. "Oh, Jesus, it's him!" Max exclaimed. "Wow," the demon replied sarcastically. "I guess he's the smart brother, right?" "What do you want from us?" I replied, meeting the demon's gaze despite my fear. "I told you all I want is a deal. Let's work together so everyone can follow their own path." "Don't trust him," Isabella screamed. "He's bad." He gave her a look and raised its claw threateningly. "This psycho," Dante suddenly swore, before firing at almost point-blank range. The blunt force of the shotgun blast threw Marco backwards, and his limp body lay motionless on the tiled floor of the lobby. Dante laughed nervously, pulling away from his victim before saying, "See? He's not that tough." But a moment later, Marco was back on his feet, the hole in his chest miraculously healing as he roared with all the fury of hell. Dante's eyes widened in terror as he turned around. He tried to re-aim his shot, gun, but the demon was on him in an instant. In one swift action, Marco snatched the gun from Dante's hands, and then the demon flailed with his clawed hand, deep into Dante's jugular vein. Our comrade grabbed his throat while your bullet gushed in all directions. Dante managed to turn around and face us, his eyes filled with shock and pain, and then he fell heavily to the ground, bleeding in a matter of seconds. I was overcome with anger, raising my weapon. It is shooting up shot after shot at the demon. Max followed suit, shooting his revolver, but of course it was useless. "Serious?" Marco exclaimed as the multiple wounds on his body healed instantly. A second later, he used some kind of dark magic to rip out the wounds with our hands and throw them on the floor, and then Marco, or whatever the hell he really was, looked at us like a spider watching its trapped prey. It was a terrifying experience. It's not just that he was virtually invincible and capable of tearing us to pieces. It seemed he could also see into our dark hearts, revealing dark secrets about us that he could not know. As he stared at me with those dark demonic eyes, I felt my resolve melt. "Hunter Bell," he sneered, "the good brother, always going out of his way to help his little brother. That's your story, isn't it?" I didn't respond, lowering my head as I could no longer meet the monster's gaze. "Let's be honest, Hunter, shall we?" the demon continued. "You've always felt superior to your little brother, haven't you? You secretly want him to fail so you can step in and play the hero." I shook my head vigorously, but I couldn't find the words to respond. And then Marco delivered the blow. "Tell me, Hunter, have you ever told your brother about that time in high school? You know, when you had sex with his girlfriend behind his back?" Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. I meekly turned to face Max, seeing the disappointment and hurt in his eyes. Fortunately for me, the demon soon turned its attention to a new target. "Andrew Bailey, a respected bank manager and family man. But isn't it strange how he doesn't wear his wedding ring to work? How strange that he spends so many nights working late with young Isabella? Adverts." I saw the look of guilt in the manager's eyes and realized that he was in fact having an affair with his employee. But Marco wasn't done with him yet. "You're going to open that safe for me," he growled aggressively. "I am not going," Andrew responded defiantly. "Oh, I think you will," Marco said threateningly. What happened next was a violent blur as the demon shot forward at incredible speed, reaching out and grabbing Isabella before either of us could react. He placed his sharp claws on her throat, making it clear that he could end her life with a simple flick of his wrist. "Oh, God!" Isabella whimpered as she froze in terror. "No, don't hurt her," Andrew shouted in panic. "You know what you need to do to save her." Marco responded threateningly. "Okay, I'll do it. I will open the safe," Andrew confirmed, his resolve now broken. "Good," Marco said, a cruel smile now evident on his distorted face. "The manager is going to open the safe and you two are going to go in and get what I want," he said, pointing at me and Max. "Why do you need us?" I asked nervously. "Why can't you get it yourself?" "He can't cross the threshold," Andrew interrupted. "Silence!" Marco spat angrily before turning his attention to me. "You must retrieve this item for me or your brother will be next to die. Everything else inside the vault is yours to keep." It seemed like a fair deal on the surface, but I was sure this evil entity couldn't be trusted. But at that point we had few options, so I reluctantly agreed to cooperate in the hopes that the demon would keep his word. Soon after, we were forced to climb over the pile of dead bodies to get to the vault. The entity that called itself Marco kept a watchful eye on all of us and continued to hold the sobbing Isabella in its firm grip with its claw around her throat. Andrew hesitated before entering the safe combination, but relented when Marco threatened his secret lover once again, taking away from her neck and making the poor girl scream in terror. With a shaking hand, the bank manager did as he was required, entering the combination before turning the handle and opening the heavy steel door. After he did this, Andrew growled at our captor, shouting, "I did what you asked, now let her go!" Marco smiled sadistically, and for a moment I thought he would slit her throat just for fun. But fortunately he didn't do that. "As you wish," he finally replied and kept his word. As soon as she was free, Isabella ran to Andrew, and the two embraced emotionally. Now, Marco continued as he looked between Max and me, you two need to give me what I want. Max and I exchanged a fearful look. I waved to my brother, and we both slowly walked toward the artificial light inside the vault. We saw wads of cash and sealed lockboxes stacked on metal shelves on either side of us. The item I need is the third one on the top shelf on your left. Bring to me, Marco ordered sternly. I walked over to it and placed my hands on the cold metal box, feeling a terrible foreboding as I did so. The box was small, just 6 inches in diameter, but it felt heavy in my arms. I struggled to carry the weight toward the monster known as Marco, seeing the hunger and desire deep in his dark, inhuman eyes as he held out his clawed hands in greedy anticipation. Give it to me, he ordered loudly. Give it to me now. I took a moment, looking at Andrew, who shook his head in fear. But to my eternal shame, I gave the monster what he wanted, placing the box right in Marco's hands. The beast roared in joyful celebration as it shattered the box. Looking inside, I saw a small amulet attached to a golden chain with a red ruby in the center. It didn't seem like much at first glance. A simple piece of jewelry without much meaning. But clearly the necklace was of great importance to the entity disguised as Marco, for he placed it around his neck and shouted in triumph. Finally, after all this time, my full power has been restored. Now nothing can stop my rise to glory. These prophetic words chilled me to the bone, and I realized that I had certainly made a terrible mistake. But it was done now, and I couldn't go back. I turned away from the monster, looked back at the safe, and watched Max fill bags with wads of money. There's more money than we thought, bro. Maybe $250,000 in total. This brought some hope back to my tired heart. Could we still walk away with the loot? Perhaps despite all the death and suffering, we would be able to pay off my brother's debt and still have enough money to start over. It seemed that salvation was within our reach. Marco continued to watch our progress carefully before suddenly making an unusual request. That bag of coins next to the door, bring him to me. Why? Max asked, confused. We're here for the dollars, not the cents. I want, Marco snapped. Drag the bag out of the safe and leave it there. Max shrugged and obeyed, dragging the bag of coins through the door and placing it at Marco's feet. Soon we picked up and bagged as much money as we could carry. Then I turned to our captor, not liking the mischievous gleam in his eyes as he watched us. We did what you asked, I said cautiously. Now, will you keep your word and let us go? Clear, he replied with a smirk that was far from convincing. The doors are open. All you have to do is leave. They see. But before you go, I would like to give you all a parting gift to show my gratitude. I didn't like the sound of that, not one bit. That's really not necessary, I replied nervously. We just want to leave. Ah, but I insist, Marco replied menacingly, his eyes shining with sadistic glee. I knew something bad was coming, but I couldn't have predicted what the monster was capable of. We all stood in horror and amazement as the demon raised his arms and spoke an incantation in a language I couldn't understand. And as he spoke the words, the coins in the purse rose into the air, hundreds of cents, dimes, and quarters, all drawn towards Marco as if he were a giant magnet. Soon, the coins swirled around his body like debris caught in a tornado, their speed increasing as the whirlpool reached a terrifying crescendo. Marco started laughing maniacally, and we all backed away, fearing the worst. But on this occasion, my brother saw what was coming and joined the fight, pushing me aside and standing between me and the oncoming attack. No! I screamed. But it was already too late, because a second later the coins out at incredible speed, walls, flesh and bones. I saw my companions being knocked down as hundreds of coins penetrated their defenseless bodies. They all fell simultaneously with terrible injuries, certainly fatal. Andrew and Isabella together in each other's arms. For what it's worth, I believe their love was genuine. And then there was my little brother. Max had been cut in pieces, bucking the trend of a lifetime as he sacrificed himself to save me. He was still alive and conscious, but only barely, as he bled from dozens of deep wounds. I used all the strength in my body to lift my little brother and carry him to safety while the demon continued to laugh cruelly behind us. I thought Marco would finish the job and take me down, but instead he allowed me to leave with my dying brother. I returned to the lobby and discovered that the door was in fact unlocked. All I wanted was to leave that cursed bench. So I carried Max a little further, carefully placing his broken body on the sidewalk as I looked into his rapidly fading eyes. I tried to hold back the tears as I held my brother's cold hand and he struggled to speak between labored breaths. "I'm sorry, brother. This is all my fault." "Don't say that, Max." I responded emotionally. "You saved me." "At least I finally did something right," he replied weakly. Max tried to laugh but stuttered as the pain overcame him. "I love you, big brother," he managed to say. "I love you too, Max." I responded in tears. And then he coughed and closed his eyes for the last time. I was overcome with sadness, burying my head in my hands as I sobbed uncontrollably. But my attention was drawn upward when I once again heard the dirty laugh of the demon known as Marco. I saw the beast on the roof of the bank, giving me one last spiteful look before jumping onto the roof of the neighboring building and disappearing from sight. I continued to hold my brother's body as my ears were assaulted by sirens, and within minutes, a dozen police cars entered the street, with heavily armed officers jumping out and pointing their guns at me, demanding that I surrender. After my arrest, the police assigned all 13 to me. I was accused of murder all the people who inside the bank, including Dante and Max. I believe the police and the prosecutor knew more than they admitted in court. But I was a convenient scapegoat, and what could I say in my defense? The report I gave to the police sounded like bullshit. There was no evidence that Marco, or whoever the hell he really was, had been inside the bank. There was no CCTV footage of what occurred in the building that day, and no other survivors to support my story. They knew that I had entered the bank armed and ready to commit a criminal act, so the jury had little sympathy for me. In the 5 years that I was in the Hall of Death, I had a lot of time to think about Max, my life choices, and the beast I encountered that fateful day. My brother's hurt me a lot, but maybe Max was always destined for a tragic end. But my biggest regret is giving the amulet to Marco. I don't know what he did or intends to do with his newly restored power, but it can't be good. As for my own destiny, in recent years, I have accepted that would die in the execution chamber, and I had made peace with that fact. But then, just yesterday, I received a very unwanted visitor in my cell. I heard a whistle very early that morning, and it brought back horrible memories. A second later, a guard appeared at my door, looking at me through the hatch. I knew immediately who it really was. Those dark, inhuman eyes and cruel smile were an instant giveaway. "Hello, friend," said the demon happily. "Long time no see." I should have been scared, but instead I was furious. I couldn't believe that this monster had come back to taunt me in my final days. "What the fuck do you want?" I spat. Now, Hunter," the demon replied, his smile never wavering. "I only came to visit my old friend in his hour of need." I shook my head in disgust, laughing despite the circumstances. "I won't play your sick games anymore," I responded defiantly. "You have no influence over me. My brother is dead, and I will follow you soon." "Yes, life mortal. Your brother's ended 5 years ago," he confirmed. "But your immortal soul is still suffering. You'll be going to the same place very soon, and no doubt Max still needs his big brother's help in life after death. Fortunately for you, I have some influence in the other realm. I can help you and your beloved brother when you cross over, for a price, of course." My heart sank at that moment because I knew he had me once again. I thought my worries would end when they put that needle in my arm, but that was an illusion. And in the end, I have no choice. I will do whatever it takes to keep my brother safe, even if I have to fight through the pits of hell to do it. I was Earth's ambassador to an alien race. Negotiations failed. My story begins several years ago when I was a rising star in the workings of the federal government and planning a career within the political establishment in D.C. However, that didn't happen, as I received what I thought at the time was a better offer. Believe it or not, the job opportunity that led me to my current situation started in a typically swashbuckling fashion. I was approached by a high-level but essentially anonymous individual in a black suit who claimed to work for an unofficial agency interested in recruiting me for a special assignment, one that would not only help my country, but also the entire human race. It looked so ridiculous that I almost laughed in the man's face, but I noticed his expression was deadly serious, and I figured he wouldn't respond well to the mockery. Furthermore, I must admit that I was intrigued by the man's mysterious offer. The opportunity presented to me seemed too good to be true, and I thought that taking on this unusual role could propel my career to heights never before heard. And so, I accepted their offer and started down the path of no return. If I had known the whole truth back then, I would have told the G-Man to go to hell. But I didn't, and now I'm here. Fast forward 6 months, I completed an intensive training program and participated in a series of extraordinary briefings that changed everything I thought I knew about our world and the broader universe. I used to believe that we, human beings, were at the top of the food chain, but now I know better. It's difficult for me to pinpoint the exact moment when my courage failed me, and I realized I no longer had control over my situation. It wasn't when I was taken aboard a military transport plane to a secret base in the Solomon Islands, where I received my final briefing on this highly classified mission. Sure, I was nervous as they strapped me into my seat aboard an experimental X-37C orbital test vehicle, the finest in the U.S. Space Force's inventory. I believe I stood up pretty well during our launch into orbit as I joined the small club of humans who have traveled to space, although the actual numbers are much higher than most people know. I thought about the significance of the event and the importance of my mission while realizing that few would know what we had embarked on. Only a select number in the highest echelons of the U.S. government knew about my mission, and the launch of X-37 was a highly classified secret. Our rivals in China and Russia would be watching closely, of course, but their governments had been informed and were supporting our operation. In this matter, if nothing else, all the nations of the Earth were on the same side. If launching into orbit wasn't scary enough, our approach to the alien ship was truly terrifying. We saw the image on the screen, that of a huge cigar-shaped spaceship capable of interstellar travel that dwarfed our own small craft, and was adorned with high-tech weaponry beyond our wildest dreams. Our little X-37 was puny and pathetic in comparison, looking like nothing more than a primitive canoe paddling toward a mighty warship. I then realized that our alien hosts could easily blast our little ship into oblivion with the simple push of a button. But why would they destroy an armed diplomatic mission, you may ask? Well, the answer is that it is simply in their nature to be cruel and violent. And this will become evident as my account continues. I think my nerves finally broke after we completed the complex docking procedure and boarded the alien ship, going through the invasive and thorough scanning process before we were allowed inside. I vividly remember sitting in the waiting area, a grim, dark cell of cold metal, as we waited to find out our fate. My only companion was a Captain Henderson, a hardened Special Forces veteran who was as tough as they come. Henderson was tasked with acting as my bodyguard during this dangerous mission. Our alien hosts did not allow us to bring aboard his ship, but Henderson assured me that he was an expert in hand-to-hand combat and would therefore be able to protect me if things went wrong. However, I wasn't that confident. As we sat in the dark cell, I couldn't help but notice how Henderson was sweating profusely as he fought to contain his fear. He had good reason to be scared, as did I. You may have heard of the alien race I was tasked with negotiating with. Their technology is far more advanced than ours, and they have been capable of interstellar travel for thousands of years, having first visited Earth at least 5 centuries ago. I had never seen one in person, but its physical description was frightening. A red-scaled reptilian race with cold, predatory eyes and sharp teeth and claws that could tear through human flesh without the need for any advanced weaponry. What's more, they are a cruel and warlike species that secretly visits our planet for one reason only: to find victims for their torture games and sadistic hunts. Those unfamiliar with their origins simply call them reptilians or lizard people. They don't know the full story, however, as global governments have hidden the truth from their people for decades. The reptilians are actually the Astri Empire, a militaristic interstellar species from the Trappist one-star system that waged a war against its neighbors for millennia before a new galactic order established an uneasy peace to keep the Astri and other aggressors in check. But the Empire did not adapt well to this new peaceful order, and so they sought alternatives to satisfy their violent desires, seeking isolated and remote planets like ours where they could continue to live with relative impunity, far from the watchful eyes of the Galactic Confederation. And so this is where I come in. You see, our global governments have been complicit in the atrocities of the Astri for many decades. With no way to combat their vastly superior technology, we effectively allowed the Astri to kidnap, torture, and murder thousands of our citizens every year. In the United States, we simply turn a blind eye to these abductions that inevitably occur in isolated areas, and the people they take are usually those who are not missed: the homeless, drug addicts, or simply those without family or friends. In other countries, totalitarian regimes take the opportunity to donate victims to the Astri as a form of tribute, sending them prisoners, political dissidents, and so-called undesirables, while cynically using the opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. This has been the situation for a long time, as world leaders have tried to justify their secret collusion with the murders on mass Astri, believing that the sacrifice of countless thousands is necessary for the greater good, and because they fear the consequences of denying the alien slavers, knowing full well that the Astri could devastate Earth's surface with their space weaponry. But things have changed in recent times, and that's why I was sent on this dangerous but crucial diplomatic mission. For the first time in our history, we had a trump card to use against the Astri, and the powers of Earth decided to play it. And so, I had potentially the future of humanity on my shoulders. That's a lot of pressure. But as I sat in that waiting area, I just hoped that the Astri wouldn't renege on their promise to allow us an audience and instead simply throw us out of the airlock, leaving us to die in the cold vacuum of space. I almost jumped out of my skin when I heard the hidden speakers come to life and a mechanical voice speaking to us in near-perfect English. Representatives of planet Earth, the screening process has been completed and you are cleared to board the SS Glory of the Empire. Go through the door and follow the corridor to the passenger cell. Once they are safe and contained, we will continue the journey to our final destination. With that, a previously invisible door in the steel wall in front of us opened, revealing a dimly lit and uninviting hallway that led to another door at the end. I experienced a moment of fear and trepidation, finding myself temporarily unable to stand and walk, until Captain Henderson silently pulled me to my feet and practically pushed me through the door. He whispered sternly in my ear as he did so, "They are watching. Don't show the bastards any weakness or they will destroy us." His harsh words forced a cold shiver down my spine, but I knew he was right. My extensive briefings on Astri culture and psychology left little doubt. All our intelligence pointed towards the Astri without any empathy or mercy, at least towards our human race. Certainly they believed in their own version of social Darwinism, an extreme ideology asserting that only the strong would survive in an unforgiving universe and weaker species should be crushed, enslaved, or destroyed. I tried to control my fear as I trembled, stepping forward, following Henderson down the dark, featureless corridor of cold steel, barely stopping myself from jumping when the airlock at the far end opened to reveal what the ship's AI had described, disconcertingly, like the passenger's cell. Entering cautiously, we saw a room not unlike the one we had just left, cold, dark, featureless, and unwelcoming. Although we did notice 2 cockpit-style chairs that appeared to have been designed for the human body. I was surprised as we were told not to expect any level of hospitality from our alien hosts, as the Astri considered us an inferior species and certainly not their equals. I was highly suspicious, however, fearing that this might be a trap. Looking at the hard-faced Captain Henderson, I thought about asking him what he thought of this, but then I remembered that our hosts were almost certainly watching and listening to everything we said and did, so I decided against it. Henderson sat without saying a word, quickly and efficiently strapping himself in for the space travel to come. I followed his lead, watching him closely as he repeated his actions to fasten my seatbelt. I didn't know how Henderson knew what to do, and how he remained so calm and confident under the circumstances. I assumed it was his training kicking in as he quickly adapted to this alien environment. I wanted to have his trust, but what we were facing scared the hell out of me. NASA and Air Force experts warned us that we would be making a journey lasting months or even years in one of our rockets in the space of a few hours. We had little knowledge of ASTRI's technology, and most of our assumptions about their spacecraft were based only on theory. The assumption at the time was that Henderson and I would travel further than any terrestrial life form had ever done before, and we would be subjected to G-forces that no human being had ever experienced before. They had no idea whether our bodies would survive the journey, and we had to take any assurances the ASTRI had given about our physical safety with a pinch of salt. So you can imagine the fear I felt as the ship's engines came to life, and we were propelled through space at tremendous speed. Imagine my surprise and relief when I discovered that our journey was not only survivable, but also relatively comfortable, no worse than my time aboard the X-37 that transported us to orbit. The flight deep into our own solar system lasted just 3 hours, and I felt my confidence growing as I realized we could get through this part of the journey. Maybe the ASTRI were genuine about wanting to enter into negotiations, I told myself. Maybe they were finally giving us the respect we felt we deserved. That's what I thought, but now I know I was lulled into a false sense of security. I remember the moment we reached our destination, the ship slowing down as a shutter screen on the far wall of our cell opened to reveal a stunning scene. Before us was Jupiter, the majestic gas giant and the largest planet in our solar system. I stared out the porthole in awe and wonder, admiring the mighty planet's glorious atmospheric streaks and the famous Great Red Spot, a massive anticyclonic storm that lasted for centuries and was large enough in dimensions to swallow the Earth several times over. I was fascinated by the beauty of Jupiter and felt very honored knowing that I was one of the first human beings to observe the planet with the naked eye. The alien ship descended through Jupiter's orbit, speeding toward the gray, rocky moon that I recognized as Europa. As we approached the moon, I spotted a grotesque artificial structure half buried in its rocky surface, a collection of steel and powerful fortifications, spaces that I understood to be connected to a vast network of tunnels and underground chambers. My jaw dropped as I surveyed the ugly, austere facility, ASTRI's main base in our solar system. The Europa outpost has existed for decades, and Earth's governments have known about it for just as long. The Voyager probes have observed and photographed the facility from afar, and many other missions have documented it over the years. We knew it was ASTI's main staging post for its clandestine attacks on Earth, but little else. Walking in, I didn't know what to expect, but I was sure our alien hosts were showing us their moon base as a means of intimidation. There were signs of battle everywhere as we descended, and I noticed the twisted wreckage of destroyed ships and war machines trapped in Jupiter's orbit. Meanwhile, Europa's surface was riddled with fresh craters, surely the result of orbital bombardment or misdirected missiles. I looked silently at Henderson and noticed the disappointment in his eyes, a feeling I shared. We both expected the ASTRI to have suffered greater damage. As I said before, Earth's governments have long been defenseless in the face of ASTRI incursions, but that has changed recently. A year before I was recruited for this secret diplomatic mission, our space observers observed a fierce battle in Earth's orbit when an ASTRI fighter ship was engaged and apparently destroyed by a vessel of unknown origin. This event might have remained a mystery if not for the unexpected landing of a small capsule deep in the American Midwest. This escape pod contained 2 human survivors who had an extraordinary story to tell. Through their first-hand accounts, not only do we learn the horrifying truth of what the ASTRI did to their captives, but we also discover the existence of a potential ally, the Galactic Confederation, whose forces are at war with the rogue ASTRI hunters. News of the space battle finally forced our leaders to act, and a secret council demanded that the Astri agree to a meeting to renegotiate the terms of our agreement. But that wasn't the end of the story. During my training, we received news of a second space battle detected by our long-range telescopes when a small fleet of ships attacked the Europa base, resulting in an incredible but terrifying display of fire and fury. We didn't know the outcome of the battle until now, but it seemed clear that our hosts had won the fight. I experienced a terrible foreboding as our ship made final approach to the vast lunar base, the mighty craft being dwarfed by the massive facility as we docked in a landing bay with a heavy metallic clang. I was beginning to realize how far behind humanity was in this arms race. As soon as the ship docked, we received further instructions from the robotic voice. "We have arrived at the Empire's Alpha facility. You must remove your bonds and wait for our representative who will guide you into the base." We did as we were told, Henderson and I sharing a look as we unbuckled our seatbelts and stood up. The distant door activated, and I mentally prepared myself to see an Astri warrior in the flesh for the first time. I had heard the witnesses' descriptions and seen the few photos and footage we had of them, but this was not adequate preparation. I took a deep breath when the automated door opened, but I was disappointed by what I saw on the other side. We were greeted by some sort of robotic drone hovering in the air as its scanners and cameras watched us and collected data. I remembered witness accounts of the Confederate war machines and wondered if the Astri had adopted the same model. We were both confused as the robot spoke. "I am Unit 537, an AI drone in the service of the glorious Astri Empire. I have been tasked by my masters to guide you through our facilities and complete our negotiations." I was stunned and found myself unable to speak as I tried to process this unexpected development. In the end, it was Henderson who broke the silence and began an uncharacteristic outburst. "What the hell is this? Where are the Astri delegates? That's not what we agreed on." The flying robot turned to face my military companion before responding in the same monotone, mechanical voice. "I know nothing about these arrangements you speak of. Let me assure you that I have received the necessary plenipotentiary powers from my masters. I would also advise you not to engage in any more emotional outbursts. My masters may view such tirades as acts of aggression and respond accordingly. Now you must follow me." With that, the drone turned and entered the facility. I glared at Henderson and whispered, "What the hell were you thinking? Are you trying to get us?" Henderson simply shook his head in despair before saying, "No plan survives first contact with the enemy. We must adapt." I looked at my companion in confusion, wanting to ask what he meant, but Henderson simply nodded and said, "Come on, let's go." He walked through the open door, and I followed, still not realizing we were walking straight into hell. The interior of the Europa base was a little less dark and intimidating than the spaceship, but only marginally. The hallway walls were white and sterile, and my nostrils were filled with what smelled like disinfectant. As soon as I set foot inside, something was terribly wrong, and a sense of impending doom washed over me. I was scared and nervous, but it was more than that. Within seconds, my head was throbbing, the pain building inside my skull until it became almost unbearable. I felt naked and exposed, as if suddenly my deepest thoughts and secrets were there for the entire universe to see. And it got worse. Suddenly, my aching brain was assaulted by terrifying, horrific images. I saw human beings tortured by the vile by Astri, a man torn apart by claws and teeth, a screaming woman tied to a stretcher and operated without anesthesia, and many other scenes of ultraviolence. The images I saw inside my head were so vivid that I could almost hear the bone-chilling screams and smell the viscera. I struggled to stand and see straight, turning my head to look at my companion. Any hope I had of support disappeared when I saw that Henderson was fighting his own internal battle against any weapon whatever the Astri had used against us, sweating profusely as his eyes widened and his face burned red. I calculated that he was using all his mental strength in an attempt to keep the enemy out of his head, although I doubted he would succeed. This was a new tactic that we weren't warned about during our briefings. And frankly, it terrified me. What chance would we have if the Astri could destroy our minds as well as our bodies? The pressure built inside my skull until I thought my head would explode. and for one horrible moment I believed we were together by this vile method. But the attack on our brains ended as suddenly as it began, the pressure dissipating and the sadistic images fading, though I could not forget the horrors I had seen. Our robotic guide acted as if nothing had happened, leading us to another automatic door at the end of the sickly white hallway, while turning to speak to us in his mechanical deadpan voice. My masters thought you might want to visit your fellow Homo sapiens that we have accommodated in this facility. Now I will show you our holding pens. I felt sick in the pit of my stomach after hearing the drone's emotionless words, casting a glance at Henderson in the moment before the next door opened. The first thing that hit me was the smell, the foul stench of waste that reminded me of a zoo or kennels. And then I heard the wails, screams of agony and pain that I was horrified to learn came from human lips. Our robotic guide led the way as Henderson and I entered a living hell beneath blinding artificial lights. We were disgusted but impressed by the horrific scenes we witnessed. Beyond the door was a vast bunker filled with rows of steel cages stacked on top of each other to the ceiling. We saw thousands of small 6x6 cages, each containing a human prisoner, abductees imprisoned by the Astri for their sadistic purposes. I saw people of all races and creeds, men and women, young and old. Their alien captors treated them all with the same contempt and cruelty. They were all naked except for the ugly shock collars attached to their necks. And as I got closer, I saw how everyone was emaciated and left to live in their own filth. Many had scars and injuries, certainly as a result of the torture they endured. Others looked sick, and more than a few looked like they were on the verge of death. But the most horrifying moment came when the many prisoners noticed our presence, word quickly spreading through nervous but excited whispers between the cells. Suddenly, thousands of eyes lit up with something very dangerous indeed: hope. A moment later, thousands of voices were screaming in dozens of languages, crying and pleading as we passed by, begging us to save them. I couldn't bear it. The infernal noise was too much. The worst part is that I realized that we were powerless to help these damned souls. Even if the Astri agreed to release their prisoners, we had no means of transporting them back to Earth. I doubted any of these poor souls knew where they were, but they certainly guessed the terrible fate that awaited them. I felt like falling to my knees and curling into a protective ball as the desperate wails nearly burst my eardrums, but then all the prisoners made a new sound, one of shocking pain as each of them collapsed in agony, screaming as they grabbed their throats and they writhed on the floor of their cages. To my horror, I realized that the prisoners' shock collars had all been activated simultaneously as a form of collective punishment. Despite my terror, I screamed in rage and challenged our guide. "How dare you, damn it! You damn savages have no right to treat our people like this!" I realized how foolish my words were as soon as I spoke them. The drone turned to face me, and I wondered why I had taken my anger out on an AI that only served the cruel Astri and probably had no capacity for independent thought. The hovering robot looked at me with its built-in cameras, lights flashing on control panels as it processed data, and when the machine spoke, its words did not contain even a trace of humanity. Silence. I warned you both about the consequences of emotional outbursts. Let us proceed to the amphitheater, where you can witness the fruits of my master's labor. With that, the robot turned and flew forward, leaving Henderson and I to look at the defeated prisoners, all injured and silent as they stared at us with disappointment in their eyes, and they came to the terrible conclusion that we weren't there to help them. And somehow those silent looks of disapproval were even worse than his screams and pleas for mercy. I thought this was the worst that could happen. But then we walked out of the prison cell and into a new circle of hell. We walked out to an empty grandstand overlooking an oval arena with a circular field about 100 feet in diameter, surrounded by 10-foot walls on all sides. The surface of the arena was covered in a strange plastic-like substance, although the oval had a primitive low-tech feel when compared to the rest of the facility. However, I was surprised by the size of the lunar base that could accommodate a small stadium. Racking my brain, I tried to think, and soon realized how this area reminded me of a Roman Colosseum, and my heart sank as I considered the terrifying implications of my observation. Suddenly, our attention was drawn to a ring of VIP-style boxes arranged above the stands as steel shutters slowly rose to reveal a terrifying scene. This was the first time I saw them in person. The Astri. Dozens of alien dignitaries sat and stood in luxurious boxes behind thick glass, all looking at us with sadistic glee in their cold reptilian eyes as they bared their fangs and salivated from their snout-like mouths. I looked from side to side in panic, realizing that the vile creatures were everywhere around us, although they remained behind their transparent barriers, apparently waiting for something to happen. Henderson stood up immediately as his instincts kicked in. He automatically took one weapon that he wasn't carrying before giving our robotic guide a look that might have the... "What the hell is the meaning of this?" he demanded. The drone's cameras watched him with cold indifference, and I imagined all his observations were being transmitted to the Astri dignitaries watching over us. The machine responded to my companion's angry question in its usual emotionless robotic tone. "My masters have arranged some entertainment for your visit. I suggest you remain silent and observe." And then I was still trying to figure out what the machine meant when I noticed a hidden door opening in the circular wall of the arena below us, revealing what appeared to be a ramp leading down to the plastic-covered floor. I watched in shocked horror as 1, 2, and then 3 bodies slid down the ramp, all falling heavily to the ground before the door closed, trapping them inside the walled arena. At first I thought the 3 of them were dead, but it turned out they were just disoriented or possibly drugged, as within moments everyone regained some level of composure and managed to stand on their shaky legs. I saw that they were all young men, half naked and emaciated, terror in their eyes as they surveyed their new prison. A moment later, a second compartment opened to reveal a steel stand filled with weapons, including what looked like machetes, axes, and short swords. The frightened trio looked at the weapons in confusion, clearly having little idea why they were there and what was expected of them. Unfortunately, I now had a pretty good idea of what was about to happen. Suddenly, a second door opened on the other side of the arena, and something horrifying appeared, advancing towards the floor of the arena. With all the fury of hell, the Astri I saw seemed larger than average, perhaps 8 feet tall. I saw old scars cut on its red scales, and then I imagined that this beast was a veteran warrior. Its lizard eyes were those of a cold, calculating predator, methodically scanning the target zone, searching for his victims. The warrior was armed with a long weapon similar to a spear, but it hardly needed the spear, as its teeth and claws were certainly enough to tear its victims to pieces. I looked up at the sealed boxes above and noticed how the Astri spectators leaned forward, their eyes wide with excitement as they relished the prospect of the violence to come. And then I looked at the 3 young men in the firing line, all confused, exposed, and terrified as they cast their eyes upon the beast. I wanted to shout a warning to these men, but what good would that do? Henderson and I were powerless to intervene. The Astri warrior advanced at astonishing speed, letting out an animalistic roar as he closed in on his prey. 2 of the men fled, running back to the wall and desperately trying to find a way out. The 3rd prisoner froze in the middle of the arena, falling to his knees and begging for mercy. But of course, he got none. I expected the warrior to run him through with his spear, but instead he threw a high kick, deftly using the 6-inch claw on his foot to cut deep into the man's throat, opening his jugular and spreading all over the plastic floor. The other 2 watched as their companion's limp body fell to the ground as he continued to bleed, and the warrior shouted in triumph. The surviving men now knew their only chance was to fight, and so they seized support primitives, the first one taking a and the second arming himself with a sword. The man wielding the sword looked oriental in origin and seemed to have some combat skills. He was also brave, rushing forward to meet the warrior head-on and parrying his spear's heavy blows. The fight did not last long, however, as the sheer force of Astri's attacks knocked the man down, forcing the sword from his hands. The human screamed as the alien stomped on his head, burying its claw deep into his skull. The third and final man was not a great fighter, but he took advantage of the chance, attacking the beast from behind and with your... Astri's scaly skin was thick, but the blade still penetrated, causing the beast to scream in pain and fury. He was injured, but not seriously, soon turning to face his attacker. The human looked into the eyes of the alien and broke, throwing his weapon on the ground and fleeing across the arena. The warrior didn't miss a beat, raising his spear and throwing it with immense force. The projectile flew through the air, hitting the man in the back and impaling his body against the arena wall. The dying man shook as his life ebbed away, and the alien warrior roared in celebration of his victory. His fellow Astri were equally happy with the result, slamming their claws against the glass in excitement as their sadistic desires were satisfied. I looked at Henderson and saw that his fists were clenched tightly, and his face was red with fury. As for me, I just felt sick to my stomach at the atrocity we were forced to witness. I shook my head in disgust as I looked at the hovering machine and mumbled my emotional words. What's the point of all this? Why bring us here just to watch our people being tortured and... I thought you wanted to negotiate, damn it. The robot paused briefly before giving its revealing response. Indeed, my masters agreed to these negotiations in good faith. Your side has broken the terms of our agreement. I was surprised and confused by this statement. What the hell do you mean? I demanded. Your scan showed nothing, the machine explained, but your companion raised a red flag. I turned to face Henderson only to find that he wouldn't meet my eyes. I noticed how his face had fallen and turned pale white as sweat dripped from his pores. I was speechless, but our robotic guide continued to explain the situation. The trail was subtle, but our sensors detected a viral infection in the blood from Captain Henderson. Analysis of the virus confirms that it is genetically modified, specifically designed to be harmless to Homo sapiens, but lethal to the Astri species. Clearly, the intention of Earth's governments was to infect and destroy the Astri population of this base with their weapon rudimentary biology. My jaw dropped in disbelief, and I thought this must be a lie. I turned to Henderson in hopes of reassuring myself, only to see him attack the robot with malicious intent. But the machine reacted instantly, extending a mechanical arm and shooting up a dart to Henderson's chest. He staggered back, looking at me guiltily before his eyes rolled back into his skull and he fell heavily onto the support. I turned around in time to see the robot again, aiming his outstretched arm towards me as he prepared to shoot a second. Wait, I shouted, but it was useless. The dart hit me in the center of the chest, causing me pain but not a fatal wound. But whatever poison the dart contained ran through my veins, and suddenly my entire body went numb. Then I felt myself falling as my legs gave way and I hit the ground hard, and my entire world went black. I woke up slowly, still feeling groggy, as I opened my eyes and tried to move, only to find that I couldn't. To my horror, I found myself inside a cramped cage hanging over an enclosure of some kind. I could barely move as the cage was so small, and when I looked down, I saw thick vegetation of tropical plants and a clearing directly below me. Looking to my left, I found my companion, Captain Henderson, awake and also trapped in a tight cage hanging over the pen. I opened my dry lips and forced my words out, shouting angrily as I chastised Henderson for his betrayal. What the fuck, man? You let them inject a weapon biological in you? You are crazy? Henderson lowered his head, once again not looking me in the eye. I was just following orders. Whose orders? I screamed. What lunatic ordered this attack? What made them think this madness would work? It was always a risky bet, but the board believed it was our best chance. But why? Why didn't they tell me? What the hell happened to our negotiations? Henderson sneered disdainfully before answering me. Wake up, man. The diplomatic mission was just a cover. We can't negotiate with these monsters. They treat us like prey, for God's sake. The real mission has always been military, and we are both expendable. I was shocked, horrified, and angry to hear Henderson's revelation, although I had to admit it made sense. But one thing was clear. Henderson's mission had failed, and now we were both in grave danger. As if on cue, we heard a heavy rustling of the vegetation below as something large broke through, making its way towards the clearing. I knew whatever beast they had released would be evil, but what appeared in the clearing was beyond my worst nightmares. My limited words will never do the monster justice, but the best comparison I can make is to a black spider that has grown to enormous size. Its body must have been twice the size of an adult man, complete with 8 long, thick legs covered in fur-like fur, and the creature had a set of 12 dark eyes like a kaleidoscope that scanned the area with a predatory zeal. But as if all that wasn't bad enough, the spider-like beast also had a long, thick tail with what looked like a stinger at the end, sharp, protruding, and dripping with what I guessed was some kind of deadly venom. The monster screamed with joy and excitement when it saw us hanging in our cages, and I wondered what our captors had in store for us. There was an ominous beep, and a moment later the bottom of Henderson's cage opened, causing him to fall into the clearing below. I heard a sickening crunch as he fell heavily and figured the soldier had broken his ankle, but to his credit he got up and faced the monster. The beast rushed forward on its 8 legs, screaming like a banshee as it lashed out with its stinger. Henderson managed to dodge the first 2 attacks, but the third hit him in the shoulder, causing him to scream in pain as he fell to the ground. I could only watch in shocked horror as the injured Henderson tried to crawl to safety, but the monster struck him again, using its stinger to impale the defenseless man in the back. My companion shouted again, louder this time. He looked at me with pain and terror in his bloodshot eyes. And a moment later, the beast dragged him back into the thick undergrowth, Henderson still screaming as he faced his terrible fate. I didn't want to imagine what was happening to my companion, but at that moment a familiar robotic voice screamed to reveal the horrifying truth. My masters want you to know that the predator does not kill Captain Henderson. She will lay her eggs inside his still living flesh, keeping him alive until they hatch. After that, his offspring will feast on him. The entire process will last several days and will be excruciating for your companion. I shuddered in cold terror, nausea rising from the pit of my stomach as I dry heaved in disgust. I could barely speak through my trembling lips, but somehow I managed to utter a response. I suppose you intend to do the same to me? No. My captor replied, my masters will spare you and allow you to return to your home planet. You are being spared to deliver a message to your leaders. Tell them what you saw here and let them know that their treachery has been exposed. There will be repercussions for their deception in due time. In the meantime, we are doubling the quota and expect the next batch of taxes to be delivered within 1 of your weeks. Failure to comply will result in severe penalties. These veiled threats chilled me to the bone as I continued to hear Henderson's muffled screams, and my cage was slowly removed from the beast's enclosure. As it turned out, the Astri kept their word and sent me home. I'm almost embarrassed to admit my relief at surviving the ordeal, and now I'm racked with survivor's guilt, not to mention fear of what the Astri will do next. When I arrived home, I was inevitably interrogated extensively and aggressively by several government agents and senior military officials, who were constantly ordered to report on the events of our failed mission. I think they knew how badly they had screwed up and were really scared of the inevitable backlash. I think some of my interrogators wanted to blame me, but I think others disagreed because I ended up being released. I hope I'm not long for this world, however, as several witnesses have fallen victim to unfortunate accidents in recent months. Our leaders are scared because they know the Astri could come after them at any moment. They will do anything to save their own skins and cover up their mistakes. And that includes sacrificing thousands of their own people as tribute to these murderers monstrous. And so, I decided to tell my story before it's too late. The threat we all face is more serious than ever, and our governments are complicit in the atrocities of the Astri. I don't know how we can win this war, but we must stand and fight because the price of doing nothing is too high to bear.